We begin with the decision to allow Russia to compete in next month's Rio Games. The International Olympic Committee says it will not impose a blanket ban in response to allegations of state-sponsored doping. Instead, it's leaving the decision to each athlete's international sports federations. Russian athletes must still meet some strict conditions to compete. The former president of the World Anti-Doping Agency says the IOC's ruling falls short.
I think it's a huge opportunity to make a statement of principle consistent with declarations to date, and it's been squandered, passing the buck down to international federations, especially this close to the Olympic Games, when they probably don't have rules that would allow them to act quickly, is simply it's a huge mistake and a missed opportunity.
Well, we're covering all angles of this story. From The View from Moscow, Clare Sebastian is in the Russian capital. Shasta Darlington is joining us from Rio, and World Sports' Patrick Snell is with me at the CNN Centre. First, we'll go to Patrick. Patrick, the World Anti-Doping Authority issued this scathing report not that long ago, showing that 600 samples had been tampered with dating back to 2011. Why wasn't that enough to ban Russia from the Games?
Well, we just heard from its former president, Dick Pound, there, kind of expressing, you could sense the palpable disappointment there with the decision. But it does beg the question, Lynda, from the critics, what does need to happen for a blanket ban to be ensued and to be handed down? I want to point out this would have been unprecedented had the International Olympic Committee and its president, the German Thomas Bach, gone down this route. It would have been the first time ever that we would have seen that. So the critics out there will say, well, look, if it doesn't happen in the wake of these allegations, when will it happen? I think history will come back, Lynda, to look at this as a hugely significant day. And so much was riding going on to this day on the legacy of the relatively new IOC president, Thomas Bach. And we've seen a whole series of retesting going on recently. And we've seen positive results now attributed to Beijing 2008, to London 2012 as well. What happens if, say, 4 years from now, we get to Tokyo 2020 in Japan, when the Japanese host the Summer Games? What if we find that retesting is done there retrospectively and we see that, in fact, there were doping in play ahead of this Rio 2016? So much riding on from this decision from the IOC and its president. The fallout is coming all the time. And in fact, within the last few moments, I can tell you, the onus was passed on to the individual sports federations to make these decisions. And we're seeing this already with the International Tennis Federation among the first out the door, basically saying that 7 Russian athletes slated to compete in Rio will, in fact, be eligible to compete as of right now. So we're seeing this, and we're going to get this. I'm expecting this to develop over the next day, the next few hours as well, as the onus falls very sharply, Lynda, on the individual tennis federations. They have to make the call.
Right, and looking at the individual federations at the Olympics, we know obviously track and field already have banned all the athletes from Russia. What others may follow suit?
Well, again, that's going to come down to the individual burden and the onus that falls on them. And we've just seen the first out the door, as I say, the International Tennis Federation. But I want to reference that, what you referenced, the 67 track and field Russian competitors. We now know that they definitely will not be going. Let's remind our viewers that they are subtracted from the original 387 Russian would-be Olympians. That's a big, strong party. Remember, Russia is traditionally, even go back to the former Soviet days, but Russia is traditionally a powerhouse nation. At 387, their party would have been originally, subtract 67 from that. So you've still got around 320 Russian Olympians headed to South America's first ever Summer Games. But as I say, we're watching everything very closely indeed. It's going to be very intriguing to see what happens now. This fallout is going to continue for days to come. And remember, the Summer Games, Lynda, start on August the 5th. We're down to just a number of short days before they actually get underway.
That's right, a couple of weeks to go. Patrick Snell, thank you. I want to go to Clare Sebastian now, who's in Moscow with reaction there. No doubt Russians are very grateful for this decision.
Lynda, yeah, there's a palpable sense of relief here from Russia. I think a total ban on the Russian team would have been seen as a major disgrace in this country that sees itself as an Olympic superpower, where its record is so strong in the Olympics. And I think that there's a sense of vindication as well, because Russia, the argument coming out of Russia for the past few days has been like collective responsibility for all the athletes is simply not acceptable, and that they were advocating for the individual justice of the athletes, for individuals to be able to be given the chance to compete. The Russian sports minister Vitaly Mutko came out very quickly after the announcement from the IOC. Let's have a listen to what he said.
We are very grateful to the International Olympic Committee, the Executive Committee, for their decision concerning the national team of Russia. This is a very important decision. This is in the interests of world sport, of the Olympic family, because doping is clearly an international evil and not just Russia's problem.
Vitaly Mutko also saying that he is confident that most of the Russian team will be able to meet the criteria for entry into the Olympic Games. We also heard today from Alexander Zhukov, the head of the Russian Olympic Committee. He was at the meeting there in Lausanne with the IOC, and he came out and said Russia is going to, sport is going to be cleaner in Russia. Russia will cooperate with all international organizations, and it's promising a complete overhaul of its anti-doping system. Now, of course, this is not an ideal scenario for Russia when it comes to the Olympics. As Patrick was saying, the track and field team is still banned. Russian officials are still not going to be, from the sports ministry in particular, are still not going to be given accreditation for the Rio Games. And of course, the IOC has also said that it will not sponsor or support any sporting events in Russia while the investigations in the WADA report are being looked at. And so this is definitely good news for Russia today in a week that has been full of disappointment, but still not an ideal scenario for this country.
Okay, Clare, Sebastian, with the Russian reaction for us, I want to go now to Shasta Darlington, who is in Rio. Shasta, there have been a string of problems there with the Olympics less than 2 weeks away, and only recently has the drug lab there been reopened after being suspended.
That's right, Lynda. In fact, this is some good news for Rio, for the organizers. They've said all along that they will respect and carry out the IOC's decision. They're committed to ensuring clean games. But last month, the only lab here in Rio de Janeiro that could test the urine and the blood samples for doping, they had their accreditation suspended by the World Anti-Doping Agency. So there was some concern that this would just be another embarrassment in the long list of embarrassments. But they have now reinstated the accreditation. This lab is now able to carry out those tests. The samples will not have to be sent abroad. And the latest decision now coming from the IOC, it could also have an effect on the games themselves. They've had some problems really firing up enthusiasm here. Ticket sales have been flagging, and there had been some concern that if some of the star Russian athletes didn't show up, that could just be another negative factor weighing on ticket sales. Now it looks like at least a good chunk of them will be. So they're hoping that ticket sales that have been sitting at around just over 70% will begin to take off, especially since they're now putting up some of the tickets for the very popular sports here in Brazil, like beach volleyball, like football, and of course gymnastics. Lynda.
Okay, Shasta Darlington staying across it all for us in Rio. Thank you very much.